A millionaire abandoned his elderly father on Christmas night. Days later, he was in shock when he learned what had happened to his father. In the small house in the historic district of Santa Fe, Matthew Vargas carefully arranged his small prayer table. His wrinkled fingers, marked by 75 years of a life dedicated to hard work, trembled slightly as he lit the white candle before the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe. The scent of melted wax mingled with the aroma of tamales his neighbor, Donna Rosa Martinez, had prepared earlier that day. It was Christmas Eve, and the air carried that melancholy characteristic of the elderly, who find themselves alone during the holidays. "Most Holy Virgin, watch over my son Victor," Matthew murmured, his words laden with a mixture of pride and sadness. He achieved everything he dreamed of in New York, but each day he seems more distant. "It's been so long since he came to visit me." His watery eyes contemplated the flickering flame, as memories of past Christmases flooded his mind, especially those when his late wife, Carmen, filled the house with laughter and the aroma of hot chocolate. The old telephone rang in the living room, interrupting his prayers. Matthew rose with difficulty, his joints protesting against the abrupt movement. It was yet another sales call, those that always came at the most inopportune moments. As he tried politely to end the conversation, his eyes absent-mindedly scanned the photographs on the wall, records of an entire life, culminating in Victor's graduation and the inauguration of his first company. "No, miss, I'm not interested in changing my phone plan," he patiently explained, when a different smell began to invade his senses. Something beyond the melted wax, something that made his heart instantly race. "I need to hang up," he said abruptly, setting the phone aside. The smell of smoke was now unmistakable. Upon hurriedly returning to his makeshift altar, Matthew felt his blood run cold. The candle had tipped over, and the flames were already voraciously consuming the lace curtains that Carmen had sewn so many years ago. The fire was spreading at an alarming speed, fueled by the dry fabric and the old wood of the walls. His trembling hands tried uselessly to extinguish the flames with a dish towel, but only managed to worsen the situation. "Help! Help!" His voice, choked with panic, echoed through the house as smoke began to take over the environment. The intense heat and thick smoke made his eyes burn, and his breathing became increasingly difficult. Matthew stumbled toward the door, but his feet became entangled in the rug, causing him to fall heavily to the terracotta floor. Matthew's cries finally reached the attentive ears of Donna Rosa, who immediately dropped her chores and ran into the street, alerting other neighbors. "Don Matthew is in danger. The house is on fire." Her shrill voice cut through the Mexican night air as flames began to project from the windows of the small residence. Within minutes, a small crowd had formed in front of the house. Martin Flores, the young mechanic from the workshop next door, didn't hesitate to break down the door, finding Matthew still conscious but coughing violently, lying on the living room floor. With the help of other neighbors, he managed to remove the elderly man from the burning house, while someone had already called the firefighters and an ambulance. "My house, my memories," Matthew murmured, between fits of coughing, helplessly watching the flames consume decades of memories. Donna Rosa held his hand, trying to comfort him as sirens began to sound in the distance. "Calm down, Don Matthew. The important thing is that you're alive. We'll call your son Victor." The sound of sirens mingled with the murmurs of the crowd gathering on the street, as firefighters battled the flames, consuming Matthew Vargas's small house. The elderly man, now sitting in the ambulance with an oxygen mask on his face, watched with tearful eyes as each piece of his life was devoured by the merciless fire. Donna Rosa, still by his side, unsuccessfully tried to contact Victor through the phone number Matthew always carried, written in his wallet. "The phone just goes to voicemail," she said, frustrated, as the paramedics insisted that Matthew needed to be taken to the hospital for a more detailed evaluation. "Maybe he's in some important meeting," Matthew justified, his voice weak and punctuated by coughing. Deep down, however, his heart tightened with his son's absence, even at such a critical time. Memories of past Christmases, when Victor was just a boy running through the house with his new presents, now seemed to belong to another life. The harsh words from his son struck Matthew's already fragile heart. While the doctors had confirmed that he would need to remain under observation for at least 48 hours, the reality of his situation was weighing on him even more heavily. He no longer had a home to return to, and most of his savings had been invested in recent renovations to the property, including a new paint job he had done with the intention of welcoming his son for Christmas. "And now, where will you go, sir?" Victor asked after a long sigh of impatience. Matthew felt tears silently rolling down his wrinkled face as the IV dripped monotonously by his side. "I don't know, son. Maybe Donna Rosa could take me in for a few days until I—" His voice faltered, interrupted by another coughing fit that made his chest ache. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Matthew could practically visualize his son, in his luxurious office in New York, torn between filial obligation and the inconvenience the situation represented. Finally, Victor spoke, his tone now forcedly controlled. "Look, Dad, I don't think there's any other way. You'll have to come here, stay with me until we sort out this situation. Elizabeth and I have plenty of space in the mansion, and you need care now." As the night wore on at Santa Fe Municipal Hospital, Matthew faced a storm of conflicting emotions in his hospital bed. Victor's proposal for him to temporarily move into his mansion in New York hung in the air like a charged cloud, about to burst. Doctors came and went from the room, checking his vital signs and adjusting medications, but his mind was far away, lost between painful memories and apprehensions about the uncertain future that lay ahead. "I'll send a driver to pick you up tomorrow," Victor declared, his voice taking on that businesslike tone Matthew so despised, the same one he used to negotiate with his employees. "As soon as you're discharged, he'll bring you straight here. I've already spoken to Elizabeth, and she's preparing one of the guest rooms." The elderly man clutched the hospital sheet between his fingers, feeling more like merchandise being transported than a father being welcomed by his son in a time of need. Donna Rosa, who had remained at the hospital even after visiting hours ended, thanks to the compassion of the nurses, held Matthew's hand as he relayed the plans. "Don Matthew," she began, hesitant, her dark eyes revealing genuine concern, "are you sure you want to go? You can stay at my house until we rebuild yours. We've been neighbors for so many years." Matthew interrupted her with a sad smile, gently squeezing her hand. "I can't be a burden to you, Rosa. Besides, maybe this is an opportunity to reconnect with my son." The words sounded hollow even to his own ears, echoing through the silent room like promises he knew would hardly be fulfilled. As night neared its end, and the first rays of sunlight began to seep through the hospital window, Matthew was overcome by a growing sense of unease. He remembered the last Christmas he spent at Victor's house 2 years ago, and the way Elizabeth looked at him over her designer glasses, as if he were a stain on her imported Persian rug. "Your room is already being prepared," Victor informed him in his last message, sent through his secretary, as if it were just another item on his corporate calendar. Matthew noticed that his son hadn't even asked about his health condition or if he needed anything specific. It was as if the entire situation were merely another business problem to be solved, another cell in his daily to-do spreadsheet. As the rising sun painted the Santa Fe sky with shades of orange and pink, Matthew felt a tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with smoke inhalation. The driver would arrive in a few hours, and with him would come the prospect of leaving behind not only the ashes of his home, but also the freedom and dignity he had built in his simple life in that traditional neighborhood. The nurse entered the room bringing the morning medications and found Matthew sitting on the bed, staring out the window. On the street, a large family arrived for visits in the next room. Parents, children, and grandchildren, all carrying bags with fruit and genuine smiles on their faces. The contrast with his own situation made his heart ache even more. What really awaited him at Victor's mansion? What kind of welcome would he receive from a family that had treated him as little more than a social obligation for so long? As the hour of discharge approached, and with it the arrival of the driver sent by Victor, a gloomy question began to echo in Matthew's mind, mingling with the constant beeping of the hospital equipment. Would his son's mansion be a refuge or a gilded prison? The answer, he feared, would begin to reveal itself much sooner than he would like, and something in his heart told him it would be nothing like what he expected or wanted for his final years of life. The luxurious black car crossed the imposing gates of the Vargas mansion, located in the most exclusive neighborhood of New York. Matthew, still wearing the simple clothes that Donna Rosa had brought to the hospital, felt completely out of place, as he observed the meticulously tended gardens and the marble fountain that decorated the main entrance. His calloused hands nervously gripped the small suitcase with the few belongings that had survived the fire, while the driver, who had exchanged no more than 2 words during the entire trip, parked near the main staircase. At the mansion's door, Victor and Elizabeth awaited his arrival. His son, impeccable in his Italian suit, impatiently checked his gold watch, while his daughter-in-law displayed a radiant smile that didn't reach her cold eyes. Matthew observed with a pang in his heart how Elizabeth quickly adjusted her posture and expression when she saw him, instantly transforming into the perfect daughter-in-law. "Dear father-in-law," she exclaimed, hurrying down the marble steps. "We were so worried. What a terrible tragedy." Elizabeth's embrace was as superficial and cold as the minimalist decor that predominated in the mansion. Matthew could feel the tension in her body as she ushered him inside, her perfectly manicured nails slightly digging into his arm. "Victor, my love, I need to show your father the room I so lovingly prepared. Can you handle that important call in the meantime?" Her melodious voice concealed an urgency that Matthew did not fail to notice. Victor checked his watch again and nodded absent-mindedly. Sure. Dad, we'll talk later. I have an important video conference with investors in 10 minutes. Without waiting for a response, he turned on his heels and disappeared down the hallway, leaving Matthew alone with Elizabeth. Her smile began to wither as soon as Victor's footsteps faded, like a flower exposed to excessive heat. "Let's get some things straight, you useless old man," she said, her tone of voice turning to pure venom as she dragged him through the luxurious corridors. "Your presence here is repugnant. I can't stand the smell of old age you're bringing into my home. I hate the elderly. They're just a burden on society, taking up space and sucking resources from the young. I have a charity dinner to organize, and I don't need an old shaky, drooling codger embarrassing my reputation. As if the musty smell you old folks have isn't bad enough, you're also completely useless and clumsy." Her words were like sharp blades, cutting deep into Matthew's dignity as she practically shoved him up the stairs. The room designated for Matthew was in the most remote area of the mansion, close to the servants' quarters. It was a simple room compared to the rest of the house, but still more luxurious than anything Matthew had ever owned. Elizabeth stopped at the door, her gaze of contempt sweeping over her father-in-law's simple clothes. "The rules are simple, you useless old man," she said with utter disdain. "Stay locked in this room like the garbage you are. I can't stand seeing elderly people wandering around my house. You're disgusting, smelly, and a dead weight to everyone. If you dare show up in the social area, or open that toothless mouth of yours to Victor, I swear I'll make your life a living hell until you decide to drag yourself to a nursing home." "Is that clear? Or has your senile head already forgotten what I said?" Matthew felt the weight of each word like a blow to his dignity. His hands trembled slightly as he placed the small suitcase on the perfectly made bed. "But Elizabeth, I'm your husband's father." He tried to argue, his voice betraying the insecurity he felt. The smile she gave him was as chilling as a winter morning. "And I'm his wife, you disgusting old man. While you rot day by day with your musty medicine smell, I'm the one in control here. His life, his money, and most importantly, the fate of useless old people like you. Don't delude yourself into thinking you're welcome. I'd rather clean toilets than have to look at your wrinkled face every day. At the first opportunity, I'll make sure you end your miserable last days in a public nursing home where all useless old people like you belong." At that moment, footsteps echoed down the hallway and Elizabeth transformed again, her face assuming an expression of genuine concern. "Is everything all right, dear father-in-law? Do you need anything else?" she asked loudly as Victor appeared at the door. "Elizabeth is an angel, isn't she, Dad? She spent the whole morning preparing everything for your arrival," Victor commented proudly, failing to notice the gleam of satisfaction in his wife's eyes at Matthew's evident discomfort. The rest of that first day at the Vargas mansion unfolded as a silent torture for Matthew. After Victor returned to his office, Elizabeth made a point of helping him get settled, a task that consisted mainly of pointing out everything he shouldn't touch or where he shouldn't go. Her words sounded like brusque orders disguised as gentle suggestions, each sentence loaded with barely contained contempt that made the old man's heart ache. "Look here, you useless old man," she spat, flinging open the dresser drawers. I put these old rags here, perfect for someone as decadent as you. I've seen cleaner pigs than elderly people, with their habit of drooling and making a mess of themselves. And you'll eat right here, isolated. I don't want to see your drooping mouth and trembling hands ruining my imported table. After all, wasn't it enough to have set your own house on fire? Only a senile, useless old man like you would be capable of such stupidity. You must be too senile to even use utensils properly. During lunch, served on a simple tray by one of the maids who seemed uncomfortable with the situation, Elizabeth made a point of leaving the door open while talking loudly on the phone in the hallway. "Yes, dear, we have a temporary problem at home. You know how it is, sometimes we need to take in less fortunate relatives. But don't worry, it won't affect our charity dinner next week at all. I'll keep everything under control." Matthew tried to swallow his food, but each bite seemed to weigh a ton. His thoughts flew to his home in Santa Fe, to the simple but dignified meals served at his wooden table, to the genuine smiles of his neighbors. The contrast with the coldness of this mansion was glaring, and the loneliness, even surrounded by so much luxury, was suffocating. A solitary tear ran down his wrinkled face, silently falling onto the plate of imported porcelain. In the afternoon, when Victor briefly appeared to check how his father was adapting, Elizabeth transformed again. "My love, your father is so tired from the trip. I even suggested he rest a bit and have his meals here in the room to feel more comfortable," she said, her honeyed voice concealing the cruelty of her true intentions. "Isn't that right, dear father-in-law?" Her eyes fixed on Matthew like daggers, the silent threat hanging in the air. Yes, Elizabeth has been very attentive," Matthew responded, tasting the bitter lie in his mouth. Victor smiled, satisfied, and kissed his wife on the forehead. "See, Dad, I told you she was an angel. Now I need to get back to work. I have an important meeting in half an hour." As soon as Victor's footsteps faded away, Elizabeth's smile vanished like smoke in the wind. "Listen here, you century-old worm," she snarled, slamming the door violently. "Even a senile, useless old man like you can understand simple orders, it seems. Keep that drooping mouth of yours shut, or else you'll rot in a public nursing home where they let old people die alone on the floor. And if you dare whine to Victor, I swear I'll make your life such a living hell that you'll beg to go back to your burned-down house. I have no patience for useless elderly people who only serve to cause trouble and smell like mold. To me, you should all be isolated from society." Her eyes flashed with pure hatred as she practically spat out the words. The old man sat heavily on the bed, his legs trembling slightly. The room, though spacious and luxurious, seemed to shrink by the minute, the walls closing in like a gilded cage. Through the window, he could see the immaculate garden below, where gardeners worked methodically, as distant and oblivious to his situation as the stars in the sky. "Carmen," he whispered to the portrait of his late wife, the only personal object he had managed to save from the fire. "What do I do now?" Night fell over the Vargas mansion like a heavy cloak of solitude. Matthew remained seated by his room's window, watching the lights of New York glitter in the distance, each one reminding him of how far he was from his simple life in Santa Fe. Dinner had been served in the same way as lunch, on a simple tray in the room, as if he were a secret to be hidden from the eyes of the outside world. The sound of approaching heels down the hallway made his heart race. Elizabeth entered without knocking, carrying some papers and wearing a smile that didn't conceal her true nature. "Dear father-in-law, I've brought some. Written instructions. You know how forgetful the elderly can be, don't you?" Her words dripped venom as she placed the papers on the dresser. "These are the house rules. I made sure to write them in large letters to facilitate your limited comprehension." Matthew rose with difficulty, his aching joints protesting the movement. "Elizabeth, why such contempt? I am your husband's father, old enough to be your father too." His voice trembled slightly, laden with a mixture of hurt and indignation. Elizabeth's smile only widened, becoming more cruel. "Precisely because of that, Matthew. You elderly people are like antique furniture. You take up space, demand care, and in the end, you're only good for collecting dust and getting in the way of the decor." A noise in the hallway made Elizabeth spin quickly, her expression instantly transforming into a mask of sweetness when one of the maids passed by. "And don't forget to take your medicine, dear father-in-law," she said loudly, before whispering threateningly again. "Tomorrow I'll receive important visitors for the planning of the charity dinner. I don't want to see even your shadow in the hallways, understood?" At that moment, Matthew's phone rang. It was Donna Rosa calling to see how he was. Before he could answer, Elizabeth snatched the device from his hands. "Who is this meddling old lady calling here?" Elizabeth shouted, violently ripping the phone from Matthew's trembling hands. "Listen here, you useless old man. I don't want any contact of yours with that bunch of paupers. You're already a nuisance that I had to accept in my house. I won't tolerate any more disgusting old people trying to communicate with you. From now on, you're forbidden from using the phone. Your mental age doesn't even allow that anymore. If you try to contact anyone, I swear I'll throw all your medicine in the trash and let you agonize in pain until you beg to leave. I won't let a bunch of senile old people tarnish my reputation." The elderly man felt his legs weaken, needing to lean against the wall to avoid falling. "But they are my friends, my life." He tried to argue, his voice choked with emotion. Elizabeth approached, her expensive perfume mingling with the air of threat emanating from her. "Your life? Your life now is what I determine it to be. You are like a stain on a Persian rug, impossible to remove completely, but possible to hide from the eyes of visitors." The sound of the garage door indicated Victor's return. Like a magic trick, Elizabeth transformed again. "Sleep well, dear father-in-law," and she exclaimed loudly, heading for the door. Before leaving, however, she turned one last time, her eyes shining with a veiled threat. "Oh, and don't forget, tomorrow is general cleaning day in the mansion. It would be a shame if something valuable were accidentally broken by trembling and clumsy hands, wouldn't it?" Alone again, Matthew looked at Carmen's portrait, his hands trembling as he held the only reminder left of his former life. The loneliness of the room seemed to suffocate him, while the voices of Victor and Elizabeth echoed distantly downstairs, she probably playing her role as a devoted and loving daughter-in-law once again. The elderly man walked slowly to the window, observing the night in New York. Somewhere out there, his home in Santa Fe was in ruins, just like his dignity at that moment. A tear ran down his face as a terrifying question echoed in his mind. How long would he be able to survive in that gilded prison, under the cruel yoke of a woman who seemed determined to turn his last years of life into a nightmare? And worse, would his own son ever see the true face of the woman he had married? It was almost midnight at the Vargas mansion when Matthew, unable to sleep due to the worries consuming him, decided to risk a silent walk through the hallways. The sound of raised voices coming from Victor's office caught his attention. His son and Elizabeth were arguing in exalted tones, apparently forgetting the late hour. Approaching the slightly open door cautiously, Matthew realized that the argument involved the company's financial situation. "What do you mean we're on the brink of bankruptcy?" Victor's voice sounded desperate, something Matthew had never heard before. "That's impossible. 6 months ago, we had the best result in the company's history." The sound of papers being thrown onto the table echoed through the room, followed by the tinkling of a glass being filled with what was probably whiskey, a habit Victor had developed in moments of stress. Elizabeth maintained a surprisingly calm, almost calculating tone. "My love, you need to calm down. Let me take care of the finances, as I always have. I have everything under control." Her words sounded like poisoned honey, and Matthew, even without seeing her face, could imagine the fake smile she usually exhibited. The argument was interrupted by the ringing of her cell phone, and she stepped away to answer, leaving the door wide open. Matthew took the opportunity to observe his son, now alone in the office. Victor looked like he had aged 10 years overnight, his perfectly aligned hair now disheveled from nervously running his hands through it. On the desk, dozens of financial documents were scattered, and the elderly man noticed something that caught his attention: several bank transfers to unknown accounts, all signed by Elizabeth. The sound of Elizabeth's heels returning made Matthew quickly retreat into the shadows of the hallway. "It was the accountant," she announced as she returned. "He said we need to make some more adjustments to the company's accounts." The tone of her voice had changed, taking on that manipulative quality Matthew knew so well. "I'll need you to sign some documents tomorrow without questioning. Trust me, darling." As the couple continued their argument, Matthew noticed an envelope lying on the floor near the door, probably dropped during Victor's moment of exaltation. With trembling hands, he managed to pick it up without being noticed. He silently returned to his room, his heart beating so hard he feared being heard by the other residents of the house. Sitting on his bed under the dim light of the lamp, Matthew examined the contents of the envelope. His eyes, even weary with age, widened as he realized the gravity of what he had in his hands. They were bank statements and documents, clearly showing an elaborate scheme of embezzlement. Elizabeth had been systematically transferring large sums to offshore accounts, disguising the transactions as company investments. One of the documents in particular made his blood run cold, a power of attorney signed by Victor, which gave Elizabeth full power to manage all the company's accounts. His son, blinded by trust in his wife, had handed over complete financial control to her. "My God in heaven," Matthew murmured, his hands trembling as he held the proofs of betrayal. "She has been robbing my son for years." The sound of footsteps in the hallway made Matthew quickly turn off the bedside lamp. Under the door, he saw someone's shadow briefly pause, as if listening. His heart nearly stopped when the doorknob began to slowly turn. In a swift motion, he hid the documents inside the pillowcase just in time to see the door open, revealing Elizabeth's threatening silhouette. "Still awake at this hour, father-in-law?" she asked, her voice laden with suspicion. "I hope you're not. Snooping where you shouldn't be." Her gaze scanned the room like a predator seeking its prey, lingering for a moment on the pillow where the documents were hidden. Matthew felt a bead of cold sweat trickle down his forehead as he faced his daughter-in-law's penetrating gaze, knowing he had uncovered a secret that could cost him much more than just his place in that house. The next morning, Matthew could barely touch the breakfast that had been left in his room. The documents hidden in the pillowcase seemed to burn in his conscience as he tried to decide the best way to expose the truth to Victor. The weight of the discovery mingled with the fear of Elizabeth's retaliation, creating a knot in his stomach that made any thought of food impossible. The sound of Elizabeth's heels echoing down the hallway made his heart race. The door opened without warning, and she entered like a contained storm, her face a mask of false concern. "Looking for something, dear father-in-law?" she asked, casually rummaging through the objects on the dresser. "You know, it's funny. Some important documents went missing from the office last night. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you, you meddlesome old man?" Matthew felt his blood run cold in his veins, but years of experience helped him maintain his composure. "I don't know what you're talking about, Elizabeth. I spent the whole night here as you yourself demanded." His voice trembled slightly as he watched her approach like a snake about to strike. Her eyes, cold as ice, fixed on his with a frightening intensity. "Liar," she hissed, drawing even closer. "You decrepit, disgusting worm," she snarled, gripping his arm tightly. "I saw you slithering through the hallway last night, sticking your wrinkled nose where it doesn't belong. Do you really think a useless creature like you can do anything against me? Do you think anyone will believe a senile old man who can't even control his own bladder?" She twisted his arm violently, making him groan in pain. "Where are the documents, freak? Tell me now, or I swear I'll make you beg to leave this life in that public nursing home where they throw old people on the floor to rot alone. Your life is already a hell for still being alive. I can make it much worse, believe me." The physical pain awoke in Matthew a courage he didn't know he still possessed. He stood up, facing Elizabeth eye to eye for the first time. "I know everything, Elizabeth. I know about the embezzlement, the offshore accounts, how you're destroying my son's company. How could you do this? He trusts you." The words poured out like a torrent, years of accumulated frustration finally finding an outlet. Elizabeth's face transformed into a mask of pure fury. "You old fool," she shouted, grabbing Matthew by the collar of his shirt. "Who do you think you are? Do you really think Victor will believe a senile old man who can't even take care of his own house without setting it on fire? I'm the one in control here. The money, the company, his life. You're nothing but a nuisance I have to tolerate." The confrontation was interrupted by the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Within seconds, Elizabeth transformed her expression, releasing Matthew and forcing a concerned smile. "Dear father-in-law, you look so pale. Let me help you sit down." Her voice had returned to its usual honeyed tone, but her eyes still burned with hatred. "What's going on here?" Victor asked, appearing at the door. Matthew opened his mouth to speak, but a sudden dizziness hit him, making him stagger. The stress of the confrontation, combined with all the emotions of the past few days, took its toll. His vision began to darken around the edges as his heart raced irregularly. "My God, he's having an attack!" Elizabeth exclaimed, her voice dripping with false concern. "Victor, call an ambulance." As her son ran to get the phone, she leaned over Matthew, whispering in his ear with a voice laced with venom, "That's it, you useless old man, have an attack. It will be much easier to make you disappear in a hospital." Matthew tried to speak, to warn his son about the danger, but his voice wouldn't come out. The world spun around him, voices blending into a confused whirlwind. The last thing he saw before losing consciousness was Elizabeth's triumphant smile as she discreetly put something in her coat pocket, a piece of paper that looked terribly familiar. "Don't worry, dear," he heard her say to Victor, her voice distant and distorted. "I'll take care of everything. I know exactly what to do with him." The words carried a veiled threat that only Matthew, in his last moment of consciousness, was able to fully comprehend. The sound of the ambulance siren cut through the morning air as the paramedics loaded Matthew onto the stretcher. His body was weak, but his mind remained alert enough to sense the danger of the situation. Through half-closed eyes, he watched Elizabeth speaking with one of the paramedics, her face a perfect mask of concern as she gestured emphatically. "He's been very confused lately," Matthew heard her say, her voice laced with false worry. "Just today he was raving about documents and conspiracies. I think the trauma from the fire affected his mind. As his legal guardian, I want to accompany him in the ambulance." The paramedic nodded, completely deceived by her convincing performance, while Victor remained in the garden, visibly disturbed. "My love, go to the company and take care of those urgent matters," Elizabeth instructed her husband in a honeyed voice. "I'll look after your father, don't worry." Matthew tried to protest, but his voice came out only as a faint murmur. The oxygen on his face and the medication already starting to circulate in his veins made it hard to stay conscious. Still, he fought against the drowsiness, knowing that falling asleep could be extremely dangerous. Inside the ambulance, as soon as the doors closed, Elizabeth leaned over Matthew, her face transforming into a mask of pure evil. "Did you really think you could hide anything from me, you dying worm?" she whispered with pure venom, making sure the paramedics couldn't hear her over the siren. "I'm going to make you take so many mixed drugs that you'll become a drooling vegetable. Who knows, you might even have an accidental cardiac arrest. It would be a favor to the world, ridding society of one more useless old man who only takes up space and consumes oxygen. You'll spend your last days tied to a bed, drowning in your own drool, begging for the end that won't come soon enough." Matthew's heart raced as he understood her diabolical plan. Elizabeth intended to use his own medications against him, making him appear senile and confused. "You can't," he tried to speak, but she interrupted him with a cruel smile. "I can and I will. After all, I'm your legal guardian now. Victor gave me full power of attorney this morning, worried about your health after the fire." The machines began to beep faster, reflecting Matthew's growing agitation. One of the paramedics approached to check his vital signs, a moment Elizabeth seized to whisper, "When we get to the hospital, I'll make sure you receive the appropriate treatment." Who's going to believe the words of a senile, decrepit old man who almost burned down his own house? Matthew desperately tried to stay conscious, knowing that every moment of lucidity was precious. Through the ambulance's small window, he saw the buildings of New York passing by rapidly, each one seeming to take with it a part of his hope. The documents proving Elizabeth's guilt were now in her hands, and his credibility was about to be destroyed. "He's very agitated," one of the paramedics commented, preparing a syringe. "I'm going to give him a mild sedative." Elizabeth immediately intervened, her voice sweet as poison. "Doctor, let me show you the list of medications he takes. We need to make sure there won't be any dangerous interactions, right?" Her smile was triumphant as she handed the paramedic a paper, a list that Matthew was certain had been tampered with. The last words Matthew heard before the sedative began to take effect were Elizabeth's, speaking on the phone. "Hello, Dr. Martinez. It's Elizabeth Vargas. Remember our conversation about admission to your private clinic? Yes, we'll need that special room we discussed. My father-in-law is having a severe mental breakdown." Her soft laughter mingled with the sound of the siren as Matthew's consciousness slowly faded away. His last thoughts, before darkness enveloped him completely, were of pure despair. How could he save his son and the company now? How could he prove the truth about Elizabeth when she was about to turn him into a drugged prisoner in some private clinic? The world around him began to disappear, and with it his last chance to expose the truth about the woman who was destroying his family. The private room at New York City Central Hospital was shrouded in a disturbing quietness, broken only by the constant beeping of the heart monitors. Matthew, lying in the hospital bed with various electrodes connected to his chest, struggled to maintain consciousness as he watched Elizabeth conversing with the doctors in the hallway through the glass door. Her elegant silhouette gestured emphatically, her devoted daughter-in-law act so perfect that even the most experienced professionals seemed convinced. "Doctor, I'm extremely worried," her honeyed voice carried through the glass walls. "Since the fire, he's been exhibiting very strange behaviors. He keeps making up stories about documents, making nonsensical accusations. I think the trauma severely affected his mental state." Matthew tried to move, to protest, but his body felt too heavy, the result of the sedatives that had been administered in the ambulance. When the doctor walked away, Elizabeth entered the room, quietly closing the door behind her. Her sweet smile instantly transformed into an expression of pure contempt. "So, you decrepit worm, can you still speak? Or are you starting to drool like the useless old man you are?" She adjusted the IV with abrupt movements, making Matthew writhe in pain. "Every drop of that IV is loaded with something that will make you look more and more senile." The nurse entered at that moment to check Matthew's vital signs, and Elizabeth instantly returned to her performance. "Oh, nurse, good thing you're here. My dear father-in-law was so agitated. I think he's having another one of his confusion episodes." Her words were sweet, but her eyes fixed on Matthew conveyed a clear threat. The completely deceived nurse merely nodded sympathetically. Matthew gathered all his strength to try to speak. "My son, I need to see my son," he managed to murmur, his voice weak and hoarse. Elizabeth quickly intervened. "See? He doesn't remember Victor was here less than an hour ago. The mental confusion is getting worse." Her perfectly manicured nails discreetly dug into Matthew's arm as she pretended to adjust him in bed. "It's better to increase the sedation, don't you think, nurse? I hate to see him so agitated." After the nurse left, Elizabeth leaned over Matthew, her expensive perfume mingling with the smell of hospital disinfectant. "Try to say anything else, you senile trash. With every word from you, I'll increase the dose of the drugs until I turn you into a drooling vegetable. Maybe you'll have an accident and stop breathing during the night. It would be a favor to the world, rid society of another useless old man." The monitors began to register an increase in Matthew's heart rate. Fear and anger made his heart race, but that only served Elizabeth's purposes. "Nurse," she called with feigned concern. "He's having another anxiety attack. I think we need more sedatives." Her voice sounded worried, but her eyes shone with malicious satisfaction. "I've already arranged for the medications you were taking at home," Elizabeth continued, when the nurse returned with a tray of drugs, including some for emotional control. She held the cup of water to Matthew's lips, forcing him to swallow the pills. "That's it, very good. Soon you'll be so drugged you'll barely remember your own name. Just be careful not to set the hospital on fire too." Elizabeth laughed at her own cruelty. The effect of the drugs didn't take long to manifest. Matthew's vision began to blur, and his thoughts became increasingly scrambled. Through the veil of confusion that was beginning to form, he saw Elizabeth grabbing her phone. "Victor, dear, I need to talk to you about your father. I think we need to consider more specialized care alternatives. I found an excellent private clinic." On the third day of hospitalization, Matthew managed a moment of lucidity when a new nurse, unfamiliar with Elizabeth's instructions, forgot to administer one of the medication doses. His thoughts, though still hazy, began to clear for the first time since his arrival at the hospital. That's when he heard his son's voice in the hallway, talking to the doctors. "Dad?" Victor entered the room, his face showing genuine concern. Matthew realized this might be his only chance. "Son, I need to tell you, Elizabeth is—" Before he could complete the sentence, the shrill sound of medical equipment alarms filled the room. Elizabeth, who was right behind Victor, had accidentally bumped into the devices, disconnecting some wires. "My God, he's having another attack," Elizabeth cried, her voice laden with false concern. "Victor, call the doctor, quick!" As her son ran out of the room, she approached Matthew with a devilish grin. One more word, you filthy worm, and I swear I'll unplug all these machines during the night. It will be a natural departure. A useless old man who couldn't take the pressure. Matthew tried to struggle, but Elizabeth was already injecting something into his IV line. This will keep you quiet and confused. Who knows, it might even cause some interesting hallucinations. Your decrepit little head will be a party. Her eyes glinted with cruelty as she adjusted the drip rate. You know what's better. The doctor himself prescribed it, trusting my judgment as your dedicated caregiver. When the doctors rushed into the room, they found Matthew agitated and confused, exactly as Elizabeth had planned. Doctor, he was trying to pull out the equipment. She lied, her false tears streaming perfectly down her made-up face. He was saying nonsensical things about conspiracies and robberies. I think the trauma of the fire affected his mind more than we thought. The completely manipulated doctor made notes on his clipboard. Mrs. Vargas, we may need to consider more intensive psychiatric monitoring. This mental confusion could be dangerous. Elizabeth nodded, pretending to wipe away tears. I've been researching some specialized clinics, doctor. As the wife of businessman Victor Vargas, I want to ensure the best treatment for my dear father-in-law. Matthew tried to shout, to alert everyone to the truth, but his voice came out only as an incoherent murmur. The drugs Elizabeth had injected were starting to take effect, turning the room into a confusing carousel of faces and voices. You see, doctor, Elizabeth's voice sounded distant. He's completely out of his mind. We can't keep him at home in this state. Through the chemical haze that was beginning to take over his mind, Matthew saw Victor return to the room, his face a mask of concern and guilt. Son, he tried again, his voice barely audible. She is. Documents. But his words came out jumbled, meaningless, exactly as Elizabeth had planned. You see, my love. Elizabeth embraced Victor, her crocodile tears wetting her husband's expensive shirt. Your father is having terrible delusions. First the fire, now these accusations. I can't bear to see him suffering like this. She paused dramatically before continuing. Perhaps that specialized clinic I mentioned really is the best option. Matthew watched, powerless, as his own son slowly nodded, convinced by his wife's masterful performance. Whatever you think is best, dear. You've been an angel caring for him. Elizabeth smiled triumphantly over Victor's shoulder, her eyes fixed on Matthew, conveying a clear message. She had won. 5 days after his admission, Matthew was being prepared for hospital discharge. His body, now constantly doped by the medications administered by Elizabeth, barely responded to his commands. Sitting in the hospital bed, he watched with glazed eyes as she organized the discharge papers with chilling efficiency, his mind struggling against the chemical fog that kept him imprisoned in his own body. So, doctor, Elizabeth spoke to the physician, her tone professional and controlled. I've already arranged for a private nurse to administer his medications at home. I don't want to risk him getting confused with the dosages. Her voice oozed false concern as she held an extensive list of drugs, many of them heavy controlled substances she had convinced the doctors to prescribe. After all, we can't have him experiencing another episode of mental confusion. Matthew tried to protest when he saw the absurd amount of medication being prescribed, but his tongue felt too heavy to form coherent words. See, Elizabeth immediately pointed out. He's still very confused. Doctor, I think we're going to need that additional prescription we discussed. You know how these elderly can get agitated. Her perfectly manicured nails caressed Matthew's shoulder like claws disguised as affection. After the doctor left, she leaned over the bed, her expensive perfume mingling with the smell of disinfectant. Listen closely, you dying worm, she whispered with pure venom in her voice. From now on, you're going to live in a world of chemical dreams. Every drop of medicine I put into your body is another step towards turning you into a drooling vegetable. And the best part? Everyone will think it's just old age doing its natural work. Victor arrived at that moment, bringing a brand new wheelchair. I bought the best I could find, Dad, he said, clearly proud of his choice, oblivious to the look of panic in Matthew's glazed eyes. Elizabeth insisted we needed a top-of-the-line one for your comfort. Her cruel smile widened as she helped settle her father-in-law into the chair. Yes, darling, your father deserves every comfort possible in his last moments of lucidity. On the way home, Matthew watched the city through the car window. feeling like a prisoner being taken to his cell. Elizabeth continued her flawless performance in the front seat, discussing the preparations she had made with Victor. "I turned his room into a full-blown special care area," she boasted. "I even installed security cameras to monitor him 24 hours a day. We can't risk him having another accident." As they arrived at the mansion, a uniformed nurse was waiting for them at the entrance. Matthew immediately noticed something sinister in her gaze. It was the same kind of cold cruelty he saw in Elizabeth's eyes. "This is Nurse Ramirez," Elizabeth introduced. "She has extensive experience with difficult patients. She'll help administer your medications and ensure you stay nice and controlled." When Victor stepped away to take a work call, Elizabeth and the nurse exchanged knowing looks. "Remember my instructions?" Elizabeth whispered to the nurse. "I want him so doped up he can barely remember his own name. If he tries to say anything coherent, double the dose. If he persists, triple it. Understood?" Matthew felt a chill of terror run down his spine as the nurse nodded with a sinister smile. His room, once a space of seclusion, had been transformed into a private medical prison with monitoring equipment all around and a shelf full of bottles of medication. Through the chemical haze already dominating his mind, a terrifying realization began to take shape. This was not a care plan, but a slow and calculated death sentence. "Welcome to your new home, father-in-law," Elizabeth whispered in his ear as they settled him into bed. "Enjoy your last moments of consciousness. Soon all that will be left of you is an empty, drooling, raving shell, until nature finally does its work and rids us of your useless presence. And the best part? Everyone will say it was a natural death, a dignified end for an old man who lost his mind." A week had passed since Matthew returned from the hospital. His room, now transformed into a kind of private sick room, was shrouded in the gloom of the afternoon when Elizabeth entered, carrying a tray with several bottles of medication. Nurse Ramirez accompanied her, the two exchanging knowing glances as they approached the bed where Matthew lay, semi-conscious due to the increasingly frequent doses of sedatives. "Time for your special medicines, dear father-in-law," Elizabeth crooned with false sweetness as she mixed different pills into a glass of water. "Nurse Ramirez has taught me some interesting combinations that will make you even more cooperative." Her red nails clinked against the glass as she dissolved the medications, producing a murky mixture that would horrify any legitimate doctor. Nurse Ramirez held Matthew's head with unnecessary force while Elizabeth forced the liquid between his lips. "Swallow it all, you useless old man," she whispered cruelly. "Every drop of this cocktail will turn you into the perfect puppet for my plans." Matthew tried to resist, but his muscles, already weakened by days of constant sedation, did not respond to his commands. Elizabeth waited a few minutes, observing with morbid satisfaction as Matthew's eyes began to lose focus. When she was certain the drugs had taken effect, she opened her Italian leather briefcase, retrieving a stack of carefully prepared documents. "Now comes the fun part," she said, adjusting a pen between Matthew's trembling fingers. "We'll make you the great villain of this story. Nurse, help our dear Matthew sit up. We need these signatures to look at least minimally legible," Elizabeth ordered, spreading the documents over the bed. "These papers prove that you, my dear father-in-law, have been embezzling money from the company for years. Bank transfers, forged documents, all with your fingerprints, or rather with what will be left of them when we're done." With calculated movements, Elizabeth guided Matthew's trembling hand over the papers, forcing him to sign document after document. "How interesting," she taunted. "These transfers show you started embezzling right after the fire at your house. The trauma must have affected your mind, don't you think? What a moving story to tell, Victor." Nurse Ramirez kept Matthew steady while he tried uselessly to resist. "Don't worry about the shaky handwriting," Elizabeth cruelly laughed. "It will only make it all the more convincing. After all, you're just a senile old man who lost control of his mental faculties." "How sad." Her voice dripped with sarcasm as she methodically organized each signed document. The room spun in Matthew's confused mind, the words on the documents dancing before his eyes like venomous snakes. Through the chemical haze, he could vaguely comprehend the diabolical plan. Elizabeth was creating an elaborate web of false evidence, turning him into the culprit for the company's financial collapse while protecting herself. "You know what's most brilliant?" Elizabeth continued, tucking the documents into her briefcase. "When all of this comes to light, not only will I be rid of suspicion for the embezzlement, but I'll also have the perfect excuse to permanently commit you. After all, what kind of man would steal from his own son? Only a completely insane one, right?" She snapped her briefcase shut with a satisfied click as the nurse adjusted the IV drip, increasing the sedative dose. Matthew struggled against the chemical fog dominating his mind as Elizabeth retrieved more documents from her briefcase. Nurse Ramirez had momentarily stepped out to fetch more syringes, leaving him alone with his tormentor. In that moment of semi-consciousness, he realized Elizabeth was speaking on the phone with someone, her voice low and conspiratorial, echoing through the room. "It's all ready," she whispered. "The old fool has signed all the documents. In a few hours, once the meds wear off a little, I'll call him for one last performance." She paused, chuckling softly. "No, don't worry. He's so doped up he can barely distinguish reality from hallucination. No one will believe a word he says." With feline steps, Elizabeth approached the bed, holding another cup with a murky mixture of drugs. "Time for your special dose, Daddy-in-law," she cruelly sang. "We need to keep you nice and compliant for our grand finale." Her nails dug into Matthew's face as she forced the liquid into his mouth. "Swallow it all, you worm. Every drop is another nail in your coffin." The bitter taste of the drugs made Matthew gag, eliciting a satisfied laugh from Elizabeth. "Pathetic. Look at you, can't even swallow properly anymore. You know what's most delicious? Victor is so worried about the company that he doesn't even notice what I'm doing to his precious daddy. Men are so predictable." At this moment, Nurse Ramirez returned with a tray of syringes. "Are you sure about this dosage, ma'am?" she asked, a rare moment of hesitation in her cruel voice. "It's almost 3 times the recommended amount." Elizabeth turned to her with an icy glare. "Are you questioning my orders? Do you want to lose your extra bonus? Administer it all. If he departs, we'll say it was a heart attack brought on by the stress." Matthew felt the needle pierce his skin as more drugs entered his already overloaded system. Through the mental confusion, he heard Elizabeth continue her cruel monologue. "Did you know your son is already considering that psychiatric clinic I suggested? That remote one, where problematic patients tend to mysteriously disappear. But now with these documents, we might not even need that. You'll be arrested for fraud, that is, if you survive the next doses." A flash of lucidity crossed Matthew's foggy mind. With superhuman effort, he managed to mumble, "Why?" Elizabeth leaned over him, her expensive perfume mingling with the scent of the drugs. "Why? Because I can, you useless old man. Because while you rot here, drugged and delirious, I'll take complete control of the company. Your son is smart for business, but so naive when it comes to me." Nurse Ramirez was preparing another syringe when the sound of footsteps in the hallway made Elizabeth quickly recompose herself. "Quick, hide that," she ordered, hurriedly tucking away some documents. "Victor is coming, showtime." Her face instantly transformed into the mask of concern she had perfected. "Darling," Elizabeth exclaimed as Victor entered the room. "I'm so glad you're here. Your father is having another one of his confused episodes." She dabbed at non-existent tears while gesturing to the scattered papers on the bed. "I found him trying to sign some strange documents. I think the mental confusion is getting worse." Matthew desperately tried to warn his son, but his tongue seemed made of lead. The words came out scrambled, incomprehensible, exactly as Elizabeth had planned. "You see," she said, her voice laced with false concern. "He can no longer speak coherently, and these documents I found. Dear, I think we need to have a serious conversation about what your father has been doing with the company's money." Victor examined the documents Elizabeth handed him, his face paling with each page. Bank transfers, forged contracts, records of embezzlement, all bearing Matthew's shaky signature. Elizabeth kept a hand on his shoulder, her eyes shining with barely concealed triumph as she watched the painful realization spread across her husband's face. "I can't believe it," Victor murmured, his voice thick with disappointment. "Dad, how could you do this to us? To the company I built with so much sacrifice?" Matthew tried to move, to explain, to scream the truth, but his body wouldn't respond. The drugs Elizabeth had forced into his system kept him in a state of conscious paralysis, able to understand everything, but powerless to react. "My love," Elizabeth played her role to perfection. "I've been noticing strange behaviors for weeks. First the stories about missing documents, then the accusations against me. I think the trauma from the fire affected his mind more deeply than we realized." Her words dripped with disguised venom as she subtly increased the flow of the sedative-filled drip. Nurse Ramirez, playing her part in the diabolical charade, approached with another syringe. "He's getting too agitated, ma'am. I think it's best to administer that medication you set aside." Matthew watched in sheer terror as more drugs were injected into his veins. His mind screamed silently, trapped in a body that no longer belonged to him. "The auditors confirmed my suspicions," Elizabeth continued, her voice now taking on a more professional tone. "All the suspicious transactions started right after the fire. It's as if he had completely lost his mind." She paused dramatically, letting the words sink deep into Victor's troubled mind. "The company is on the brink of bankruptcy because of those embezzlements." Matthew could see, through his blurred vision, tears starting to form in his son's eyes. Each drop was a victory for Elizabeth, each moment of pain a confirmation that her diabolical plan was working perfectly. "Darling," she whispered, embracing Victor, "I know it's hard, but we need to make a decision. He needs professional help." Nurse Ramirez, seizing the cue, casually commented, "That private clinic you mentioned has an excellent maximum security ward for patients who pose a risk to themselves and others." Her words fell like stones in the silence of the room as she prepared another dose of medication. Victor broke free from Elizabeth's embrace and approached the bed. His eyes, once full of love and respect, now overflowed with disappointment and hurt. "How could you, Dad? After everything I did for you?" Matthew gathered his last strength, trying to form words through numb lips. "Son, lie." But it was useless. His voice came out as an incoherent moan. "You see?" Elizabeth instantly took advantage. "He can't even form complete sentences anymore. The dementia is progressing rapidly." She made a discreet gesture to the nurse, who immediately increased the IV drip flow. "Tomorrow I'll arrange for his admission. We can't risk him causing more damage to the company, or to himself." Matthew's world was starting to darken at the edges, the medication finally overcoming his last resistance. The last thing he saw was Elizabeth putting the documents back in her leather briefcase, a victorious smile playing on her painted lips. "Don't worry, father-in-law," she whispered in his ear as Victor turned his back. "Soon you'll have a new home where troublesome old men like you are kept nice and quiet." Elizabeth's final words echoed in Matthew's increasingly confused mind as the darkness enveloped him. "Nurse, prepare an extra dose for tonight. Tomorrow will be a very important day, and we need to ensure our dear patient is presentable for his transfer." The smile on her face was that of a predator that had finally cornered its prey, knowing that victory was complete and irrevocable. The Vargas mansion was decorated for Christmas, colored lights and shiny ornaments cruelly contrasting with the darkness reigning in Matthew's room. It was Christmas Eve, and the distant sound of Silent Night coming from the street only made the unfolding scene more bitter. Elizabeth, wearing an elegant red party dress, was packing a small bag with Matthew's old clothes, while Nurse Ramirez prepared another dose of medication. "You know what's most delicious, you useless old man," Elizabeth whispered, carelessly folding some worn shirts. "I got a vacancy at the clinic precisely today, Christmas Eve. Isn't it perfect? While everyone celebrates the birth of the baby Jesus, you'll be reborn too, as a vegetable in a nursing home bed." Her laugh echoed through the room like a funeral bell as she tossed some of Matthew's personal belongings into a plastic bag. Nurse Ramirez approached with the syringe, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "This is a special dose for the holy night," she commented, injecting the liquid into the IV line. "It will keep our dear patient nice and behaved during the transfer. After all, we wouldn't want him ruining the Christmas spirit with his crazy stories about embezzlement, now would we?" Matthew, semi-conscious in bed, could hear the sound of children singing Christmas carols on the street. Silent tears streamed down his wrinkled face as he remembered past Christmases, when Victor was still little and would run to open his presents. Now, his own son would abandon him on a night that should be about family unity. "Son?" He tried to mumble, but his voice was just an inaudible breath. "Quiet, freak!" Elizabeth snarled, squeezing his arm with unnecessary force. "Victor is downstairs finishing the paperwork for your admission." I managed to convince him this was the only available date at the clinic and a divine opportunity to rid our family of your noxious presence. He's so furious about your alleged frauds that he didn't even question the date. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made Elizabeth quickly assume her mask of concern. Victor entered the room, his face a mask of disappointment and restrained anger. "The clinic's ambulance has arrived," he announced dryly. "The paramedics are coming up." His eyes purposefully avoided his father's face, as if he could no longer bear to look at the one he believed had betrayed his trust. "Darling, are you sure you want to accompany the transfer?" Elizabeth asked, her melodious voice laced with false concern. "It's Christmas, you should be here celebrating with our family. Let me take care of everything." She approached her husband, adjusting his tie with calculating fingers. "Nurse Ramirez can come with me. Your father has caused enough trouble for our family." Two paramedics entered the room pushing a gurney. Matthew noticed something strange about their gaze. There was none of the usual professional compassion, only a cold, calculated efficiency. Later, he would understand they were employees of Elizabeth's private clinic, trained to handle problematic patients without asking inconvenient questions. "I assure you your father will receive all the necessary care," said one of the paramedics, exchanging a meaningful look with Elizabeth. "Our clinic has very efficient methods for dealing with patients in his condition." The way he emphasized the word efficient made Matthew shudder inwardly, understanding that his fate would be far worse than a mere nursing home. The paramedics began transferring Matthew to the stretcher, their rough movements showing complete disregard for the elderly man's comfort. The sound of Christmas bells echoed through the window, a cruel soundtrack for the moment of abandonment unfolding. Elizabeth supervised everything with a gleam of satisfaction in her eyes, while Nurse Ramirez packed the medication bottles into a special case. "Be careful with his head," Elizabeth cautioned, with feigned concern when Matthew groaned in pain. "My father-in-law has been so fragile lately." Her syrupy voice couldn't completely hide the pleasure she felt, seeing the old man being removed like an unwanted object. "Victor, dear, you don't need to see this. Why don't you go downstairs and finish organizing our Christmas feast?" Victor, however, remained standing in the doorway, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. "How could you, Father?" He finally broke his silence, muttering, "How could you steal from your own son? On the night we celebrate Christ's birth, I'm forced to commit my own father like a criminal." His words were laden with profound hurt, fueled by the lies meticulously planted by Elizabeth. "He can't even respond, poor thing," Elizabeth taunted, adjusting her red festive dress. "The delusions and mental confusion have completely taken over. But don't worry, dear. The clinic has very effective methods for dealing with patients like him." Her eyes gleamed with malice as she watched Matthew futilely trying to form words through his numb lips. The nurse Ramirez took the opportunity to administer another injection to the elderly man. "This will keep him calm during transport," she explained with a complicit smile to Elizabeth. "We don't want him causing any embarrassment on Christmas Eve, do we?" The cold liquid coursed through Matthew's veins, heightening his sense of helplessness. "The admission documents are all signed," one of the paramedics informed, handing a folder to Elizabeth. "From now on, the clinic has full authorization over the necessary treatments." The way he emphasized the word treatments made Matthew inwardly contort, understanding the grim fate that awaited him. Victor took a step forward, as if wanting to say something more, but Elizabeth quickly intervened. "Dear, it's time for the guests to arrive for the supper. Let me take care of everything here." She embraced her husband, her red nails caressing his back like disguised claws. "Your father has caused enough trouble already. Let's focus on our family now." As the paramedics prepared to take Matthew away, a children's choir passed by on the street, their angelic voices singing "Silent Night." The contrast between the sacred music and the cruel scene unfolding was heartbreaking. Silent tears streamed down the elderly man's face as he watched his son turn his back on him and leave the room without a word of farewell. "Finally, we'll get rid of this nuisance," Elizabeth whispered to the nurse as soon as Victor left. The clinic has been instructed on how to proceed. In a few weeks, no one will recognize the old Matthew Vargas anymore. He'll be just another confused, drugged and forgotten old man in an isolation room. Her laughter mingled with the sound of Christmas bells, creating a macabre symphony. The ambulance awaited at the entrance of the mansion, its red lights blinking silently against the Christmas decorations. The paramedics wheeled Matthew's stretcher through the luxurious hallways, passing by the massive Christmas tree in the entrance hall. Elizabeth followed closely behind, her high heels marking an unforgiving rhythm on the marble floor as she casually adjusted her diamond necklace. "Wait a moment," she ordered when they reached the main door. With a cruel smile, she leaned over Matthew, unnecessarily adjusting the sheets covering him. "You know, father-in-law, I personally selected your new home. It's a special place where useless old men like you are kept well out of society's sight. I met the clinic's director at a charity event. He has very interesting methods for dealing with problematic patients." Nurse Ramirez approached with one last syringe. "This is a special Christmas dose," she mocked, injecting the liquid into Matthew's IV. "It will ensure you have very interesting dreams on your first night at the clinic." The medication began to take effect almost immediately, turning the world into a confused haze of Christmas lights and threatening shadows. Outside, families passed by on the street carrying gifts and Christmas baskets, completely oblivious to the drama unfolding. Matthew could hear fragments of joyful laughter and Christmas carols, sounds that seemed to come from another world, a world he no longer belonged to. "Son?" He tried to call out one last time, but his voice was no more than an inaudible whisper. "Ah, look, he's still trying to speak," Elizabeth laughed, adjusting her party dress. "So pathetic. But don't worry, soon you won't even manage that. The clinic has a special or intensive treatment program for cases like yours. In a few weeks, you'll be nothing more than another old man drooling in a dark corner. That is if you survive the special medication regimen I've arranged." The paramedics began to lift the stretcher to load it into the ambulance when Victor unexpectedly appeared at the door. For a brief moment, Matthew saw a shadow of doubt cross his son's face, a flicker of hesitation. Elizabeth, sensing the danger, quickly intervened. "Dear, the guests are arriving. Let me handle this. Your father has caused enough destruction in our lives." "Is this really the only option?" Victor asked, his voice betraying a last vestige of doubt. Elizabeth entwined her arm with his, her red nails subtly digging into his skin. "Darling, after everything he did to the company, the money he stole, for it's Christmas, we should think about our family now. The clinic will take care of him, the way he deserves." As the stretcher was finally loaded into the ambulance, Matthew watched through his blurred vision as his son turned his back on him for the last time, returning to the mansion without looking back. Elizabeth remained at the door, savoring her moment of triumph. "Happy Christmas, father-in-law," she whispered, with cruel satisfaction. "Enjoy your new life. I promise it will be unforgettable." The ambulance doors closed with a dull thud, sealing Matthew's fate. Through the fogged glass, he saw the mansion receding, the Christmas lights blurring into colorful smears as the vehicle moved into the night. The sound of the nearby church bells rang out, "Silent Night." One final cruel irony on a night that should have been of love and family unity. Nurse Ramirez, who had entered the ambulance with him, was checking a list of medications with one of the paramedics. "Mrs. Elizabeth's instructions are very specific," she commented with a sinister smile. "This is the medication schedule for the next few days. The clinic's director assured me he will follow it to the letter. In a few days, the old Matthew Vargas will be nothing but a distant memory." 1 week after Matthew's admission, Victor decided to return home early. The weight of guilt for abandoning his father on Christmas Eve still consumed him, although he tried to justify his actions with the evidence of the alleged frauds. The mansion was silent when he arrived, and Elizabeth, who wasn't expecting him so soon, was in her private office on the second floor. Victor headed to his own office to review some company documents when, as he picked up the landline to make a call, he heard voices on the line. A flaw in the system had crossed the lines, and Elizabeth's voice sounded clear through the handset. "So everything is all set with the transfers, Martinez. I don't want any trail that could connect me to the accounts in the Cayman Islands." Victor's blood ran cold as he recognized the name. Martinez was the accountant he had fired months ago on suspicion of irregularities. The man's voice replied, "Don't worry, Mrs. Vargas. I used the documents you forced your father-in-law to sign to cover everything up. No one will find out it was you who embezzled the millions from the company. Everyone believes it was the senile old man." Victor felt his legs weaken, needing to lean on the desk to keep from falling. His mind began piecing together the puzzle. His father's shaky signatures, the perfect timing of the vacancy at the clinic precisely on Christmas Eve, the medication constantly administered. The schedule of transfers coincides perfectly with the time we started doping the old man, Elizabeth continued, her voice laden with cruel satisfaction. With trembling hands, Victor began recording the conversation on his cell phone as he listened to his wife detail the entire criminal scheme. "And what about those original documents that show your transfers?" Martinez asked. Elizabeth's laughter echoed through the line. "I destroyed them all after I forced that worthless old man to sign the fake copies. Now he's so doped up at the clinic that he can't even remember his own name, let alone report anything." The businessman felt his world crumbling as he listened to each detail of the diabolical plan. His wife, the woman he loved and trusted blindly, had not only robbed his company, but also destroyed the life of his innocent father. "The best part," Elizabeth went on, "is that clinic has an interesting history of elderly patients who simply cease to exist. It's only a matter of time before old Matthew has a convenient accident." Being careful not to make noise, Victor opened his computer and began accessing the company's bank records. Now that he knew what to look for, the patterns of fraudulent transfers became crystal clear. Each suspicious transaction bore Elizabeth's digital signature, carefully masked by fake documents with her father's forged signature. "And that nurse Ramirez?" Martinez asked. "Can't she cause us trouble?" Elizabeth replied with disdain. "She's paid very well to keep her mouth shut and follow my orders. It was her who helped me drug the old man from the start, manipulating the doses until he became that confused zombie everyone saw. No one questioned it when we presented the documents with that shaky signature. They all just assumed it was senility manifesting." Victor's heart raced faster as the truth unveiled itself in all its cruelty. His father, the man who had always supported him, who lost everything in an accidental fire, had been the victim of a diabolical conspiracy architected by his own wife. And he, blinded by trust and manipulated by Elizabeth's lies, had become an instrument in her perverse scheme. Still trembling from the discovery, Victor waited for Elizabeth to end the call before beginning his frantic investigation. With nimble fingers, he accessed the company's system, now scouring every file with new eyes. What had once seemed like evidence of his father's guilt now revealed a sinister pattern of meticulous manipulation by his wife. "My God, how could I have been so blind?" he muttered, uncovering a hidden digital folder with the original transfer records. Elizabeth had been careless in her confidence, keeping copies of documents proving her guilt on a secondary server. There it all was, million-dollar transfers to unknown accounts, bribery records, and most disturbingly, detailed notes on the drug doses administered to his father. His heart pounding, Victor found an especially disturbing file. An original medical report showing his father had been perfectly lucid before starting to receive Elizabeth's prescribed treatments. Nurse Ramirez had meticulously documented every dose administered, creating an unwitting record of the conspiracy. The mental confusion started precisely when she took over his medication, he realized, feeling a wave of nausea. The sound of heels in the hallway made Victor quickly minimize the windows on his computer. Elizabeth entered his office, her fake smile now appearing a grotesque mask to her husband's eyes. "Darling, I didn't know you'd be back so soon," she said, moving to kiss him. Victor had to contain a shudder of revulsion when she touched his face. "I was just taking care of some company matters. I only came to get some documents," he replied, keeping his voice controlled as he discreetly copied the incriminating files to a flash drive. "How is my father?" he asked, watching her reaction closely. Elizabeth's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "My love, the clinic says he's adapting well to the treatment, though, you know, in cases of senile dementia, like his." Victor felt his blood boil at hearing more lies but kept his composure. As Elizabeth spoke, he noticed a leather folder in her hands, the same one she always carried when visiting the clinic. "Can I take a look at the medical reports?" he asked, extending his hand. Her reaction was immediate. "Oh, I don't have them with me right now. I left everything." Filed. After Elizabeth left, Victor continued his feverish investigation. Every new document he found only confirmed the horror of the situation. On his phone, he replayed the recording of the phone conversation again. "The old man won't last much longer at the clinic," his wife's voice said. "Those special medications I arranged, we'll make sure of that. It'll be a natural death, no one will question it. Just another elderly person who didn't withstand old age." His hands shook with rage as he called his trusted lawyer. "I need you here immediately," he whispered into the phone. "And bring that private investigator you know. I've uncovered something monstrous." As he spoke, his eyes fixed on a photo of his father on the wall, the last one taken before this whole nightmare began, when Matthew still smiled with bright, lucid eyes. The voicemail system from the clinic where his father was admitted issued an automated reminder on his cell phone. "Reminder: next intensive treatment session for patient Matthew Vargas scheduled for tomorrow." Victor felt a chill run down his spine, remembering Elizabeth's words about convenient accidents at the clinic. He needed to act fast. His father's life depended on it. Victor's office was immersed in the evening's dusk when his lawyer and the private investigator arrived. In an intense, hour-long meeting, the evidence was laid out. The phone recording, the fraudulent documents, the doctored medical records. Each new revelation only confirmed the monstrosity of Elizabeth's crimes. "This is far more serious than corporate fraud," the lawyer declared, examining the documents. "We're talking attempted homicide through drug intoxication, document forgery, forced institutionalization. Your wife could be facing decades in prison." The private investigator added, "And from what I've uncovered in the last few minutes, the clinic has a suspicious history of elderly patient deaths. We need to act quickly." At that moment, Victor's phone vibrated with a message from the clinic. "Confirmation of special procedure for patient Matthew Vargas. Tomorrow, 6 a.m. His blood ran cold as he remembered Elizabeth's words about convenient accidents. "How long until they can prepare the legal warrants?" he asked, his voice trembling with urgency. The lawyer made a few quick calls. "The judge on call can issue the warrants in a few hours, but..." He was interrupted by the sound of heels approaching the office. Quickly, the men stowed away the documents as Elizabeth entered, her fake smile freezing at the sight of the unexpected meeting. "Darling, I didn't know we'd be having visitors so late." "Just an emergency meeting about the company," Victor lied, observing his wife with new eyes. Every gesture of hers now revealed her true nature, the way her fingers drummed nervously on her purse, the slight tremor in her artificial smile. "Speaking of which, didn't you have a meeting with Accountant Martinez today?" The name caused a brief lapse in Elizabeth's composure. "Martinez? No, dear, you must be confusing things. I haven't spoken to him since you fired him." The lie flowed easily from her lips as she cast a calculating glance at the partially visible documents on the table. "Is everything okay? You seem tense." After she left, the investigator showed another discovery on his tablet. "I just received this, sir. Records of bank transfers to Nurse Ramirez and clinic employees. Your wife was assembling a whole network of accomplices." Victor felt a cold fury take hold of his body. How long has she been planning this? How long has she been poisoning my father, stealing my company, destroying our family? A new message from the clinic made his cell phone vibrate. Pre-procedure preparation initiated for patient Matthew Vargas. Panic gripped Victor. There was no more time to lose. "We need to act now," he declared, rising. "I won't wait until tomorrow and risk my father becoming another statistic at that clinic." Outside the office, they heard Elizabeth on the phone, her voice low and threatening. "I don't care how you do it. I want that old man eliminated before." "What?" "No, no one will find out. We already have all the documentation prepared to attest natural causes." Victor felt his heart stop for a moment. It was the final confirmation of his worst suspicions. The lawyer quickly made one last call. The judge agreed to issue the warrants immediately, but the police will only be able to execute them in the morning. The investigator added, "By then, it may be too late for your father." Victor looked at the clock. 10 o'clock at night. The special procedure was scheduled for 6 in the morning. "I won't wait for the police," he declared, grabbing his keys. "I'm going to get my father out of that clinic right now." As he headed for the door, he heard Elizabeth's voice in the hallway, still on the phone. "Yes, make sure he receives the special medication tonight. I want everything resolved before dawn." Victor clutched the keys so tightly that they left marks on his palm. It was a race against time, and his father's life was at stake. Victor stormed into the clinic like a tempest. Accompanied by his lawyer and 2 police officers, they managed to mobilize in an emergency. The place reeked of disinfectant and despair, and the fluorescent lights flickered ominously in the empty hallways. The night nurse tried to stop them, but the court order in their hands was irrefutable. "Patient Matthew Vargas's room, now!" His voice thundered down the corridor. "Sir, we cannot allow visits at this hour," the employee tried to argue, but Victor interrupted her with contained fury. "My father is being poisoned in this place. I have all the evidence, and if you don't take me to him immediately, I'll come back with federal police and a full investigation team." His eyes sparked with a rage that made the nurse instinctively recoil. Matthew's room was at the end of an isolated hallway, away from the other patients. When they opened the door, Victor felt his heart stop. His father was tied to the bed, connected to various medication tubes. "My God! Dad!" He ran to him, his hands trembling as he removed the restraints. Matthew slowly opened his eyes, his consciousness struggling against the sedatives. "Son!" Matthew's voice was barely a whisper, his eyes trying to focus on the figure before him. "Hayuta came." Victor began to cry, holding his father's trembling hands. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm sorry for believing that viper. I'm sorry for letting this happen. I found out everything. Her lies, the thefts, how she poisoned you." His voice broke with emotion. One of the police officers examined the medication bottles, photographing everything with his cell phone. "This is practically a chemical torture chamber," he declared, horrified. "The amount of sedatives and psychotropics is criminal." The lawyer quickly documented each piece of evidence, while Victor tried to help his father sit up. Matthew, even in his weakened state, raised a trembling hand to touch his son's face. "Don't cry. My son," he whispered with difficulty. "You came. That's what matters." His words, laden with unconditional forgiveness, made Victor sob even more. "How can you forgive me, Dad? I abandoned you here on Christmas Eve. I let that woman poison you." The paramedics Victor had brought began preparing Matthew for transport. As they removed the medication tubes, they discovered needle marks on the elderly man's arms, evidence of the forced injections he had received. "We need to take him to the hospital immediately," one of them declared. "He is severely intoxicated with the amount of drugs in his system." "We're going home, Dad," said Victor, helping the paramedics transfer Matthew to a stretcher. "I'll fix everything, I promise. That viper will pay for every second of suffering she caused you." Matthew simply smiled weakly, his hands reaching for his son's. "Christmas," he murmured. "Time to forgive." His simple words carried a wisdom that made Victor realize the true meaning of a father's love. As they left the clinic, Victor noticed suspicious activity, employees trying to hastily destroy documents. "Photograph everything," he ordered the officers. "I want every piece of evidence recorded. This clinic and everyone involved will answer to the justice system for what they've done." His face was transformed by fury at the thought of how many other elderly people might have been victimized in that place. After making sure his father was being well cared for at the hospital, Victor returned to the mansion, with glacial fury running through his veins. He found Elizabeth in her private office, calmly organizing some papers, as if she hadn't tried to kill her father-in-law hours earlier. "Dear, where have you been? I was worried," she began, but her words were cut off by the sound of the door being violently locked. "You venomous viper!" Victor roared, his voice unrecognizable with hatred. "Did you really think I wouldn't uncover your lies?" With a violent motion, he swept all the objects off his mahogany desk, sending documents, picture frames, and a laptop crashing to the floor. Elizabeth recoiled, all color draining from her face. "What are you talking about, my love? You're scaring me." "Shut up!" he thundered, grabbing the leather chair and hurling it against the wall. "I heard your conversation with Martinez. I know everything, the embezzlements, the accounts in the Cayman Islands, the forged documents." Each accusation was punctuated by the sound of something being destroyed, as Elizabeth cowered in a corner. "And worse than stealing my money, you poisoned my father. You made me abandon my father on Christmas Eve." Elizabeth's favorite Chinese vase shattered near her head, making her scream. "How could you be so monstrous?" Victor continued, years of repressed rage exploding at once. "You drugged my father, forced him to sign false documents, planned to kill him in that cursed clinic. Look me in the eyes and deny it, you venomous snake." "Victor, you're delusional." Elizabeth tried, but her mask of innocence fell when he threw a folder full of evidence at her. "I have everything here. The bank transfers, the doctored medical records, your recorded conversation with Martinez. Even Nurse Ramirez has already confessed everything to the police." He grabbed a framed photo of their wedding and hurled it against the wall. "Every moment of our marriage was a lie." Elizabeth's face transformed, finally abandoning her devoted wife mask. "Want to know the truth?" she hissed with venom. "Yes, I stole your precious company. That useless old man of your father found out and tried to stop me. It was so easy to drug him and make everyone believe he was senile." Her words were interrupted by Victor, knocking over an entire bookshelf. "You monster!" he roared, approaching threateningly. "He could have died in that clinic! My father!" "The man who built everything we have, who raised me alone after my mother died." His hands shook with fury as he punched the wall beside her head. "Do you know how many sleepless nights he spent to give me an education? And you treated him like trash." The sound of breaking glass echoed through the office as Victor continued his furious destruction. "Every object in this room was bought with dirty money, money you stole while destroying my father's life." He grabbed the diamond necklace he had given her on their last wedding anniversary and threw it out the window. All lies, every kiss, every smile, every moment. Elizabeth tried to reach for her purse, but Victor got it first, throwing it on the ground and spilling its contents. "Looking for this?" he asked, holding a file. "Here are your precious proofs against my father. Look what I do with them." With an angry shout, he crushed the device containing the information under his Italian shoe. Amidst the wreckage of what was once his luxurious office, Victor stared at Elizabeth with a look that could freeze hell. "You know what's worse?" His voice was dangerously calm now. "It wasn't just the money, it wasn't just the lies. You destroyed the only family I had left. You made me doubt my own father. You turned me into the monster who abandoned an old man on Christmas Eve." Elizabeth, realizing her charade was over, completely dropped her devoted wife mask. "Your father was a meddling old man who deserved every drop of medicine he took," she spat with venom. "It was so easy to manipulate you, so pathetic with your blind trust." She couldn't finish the sentence. Victor grabbed an expensive bottle of whiskey and hurled it against the wall, the amber liquid oozing like blood down the surface. "Enough!" he thundered, his voice making the windows shudder. "You have exactly 10 minutes to grab your things and disappear from my life. If you're in this house 1 second after that, I'll call the police and make sure to personally see you rot in jail." His eyes flashed with murderous fury as he approached her. "And believe me, I have enough evidence to ensure you never see the light of day again." Elizabeth tried to maintain her arrogant demeanor, even cornered. "You wouldn't dare," she began, but was interrupted by Victor punching the wall inches from her face. "Don't test me," he roared. "I've already mobilized lawyers, the federal police, and even Interpol. Your accounts in the Cayman Islands are already frozen. Your accomplices are being arrested as we speak. You have nothing left." With a violent motion, Victor ripped a frame from the wall, their framed marriage certificate, and shattered it with his bare hands, ignoring the cuts the shards of glass inflicted. 9 minutes now. And I suggest you take nothing but your clothes, because every object in this house was bought with stolen money. Even those disgusting jewels of yours that cost my father's dignity. You can't leave me with nothing." Elizabeth screeched, her face twisted with rage. "I have rights!" Victor let out a laugh devoid of humor. "Rights? Rights? What rights does a criminal who tried to kill an old man have? Want me to call the police now? How about we discuss your rights in a cell in Merida?" Elizabeth ran for the safe behind a painting, but Victor had already changed the combination. "Looking for your fake documents? Or maybe the evidence you were keeping to blackmail me?" He tossed a charred folder in front of her. "I've already burned it all. You have nothing left to negotiate with, you viper." The sound of sirens began echoing in the distance, making Elizabeth pale. 8 minutes, Victor warned with a cruel smile. "And by the sound of it, the police have decided to pay us an early visit. perhaps to investigate a certain clinic and its peculiar treatment methods. For the first time, real fear crossed the woman's face. "You don't understand," she tried one last time. "That old fool was going to ruin everything. He found out about the transfers and—" She was silenced by Victor knocking over one last shelf, the deafening crash underscoring his fury. "That old fool is my father, the man you drugged, humiliated, and tried to kill. 7 minutes, Elizabeth. Or would you prefer to explain your crimes to the police?" Finally realizing the gravity of her situation, Elizabeth ran for the door. Before she left, Victor stopped her with one final warning. "If you ever dare to approach my father again, if you so much as think of trying any revenge, I swear to God you'll be begging for the protection of jail." His words carried the weight of a deadly promise. As the sound of Elizabeth's heels hurried away down the hallway, Victor looked at his hands bleeding from the cuts inflicted by the broken glass. The sirens were closer now, and he knew his life would never be the same again. But there was only one thought on his mind. His father was safe, and he had much to make amends for. "Forgive me, Father," he whispered to the partially shattered portrait of Matthew on the wall. "I will spend the rest of my life making up for the harm I allowed to be done to you." After 2 weeks of recovery in the hospital, Matthew was finally ready to return to his rebuilt home in Santa Fe. The doctors had managed to reverse much of the damage caused by the forced medications, though some emotional scars still lingered. The taxi drove through the familiar streets as he nervously clutched the small suitcase in his lap, all that remained of his former life. Donna Rosa had personally supervised the reconstruction of the house, ensuring every detail was faithfully restored. The adobe walls had the same soft hue as before, and the small front garden already showed signs of new life. Yet for Matthew, the thought of living alone again instilled a terror he couldn't put into words. The memories of what he had endured in the mansion and the clinic still haunted him in vivid nightmares. "We're here, Don Matthew," the taxi driver announced, pulling up before the renovated house. The old man felt his hands tremble slightly, no longer from the effects of the drugs, but from the fear that now consumed him. The loneliness, once a familiar companion, now loomed like a monster ready to devour him. "I don't know if I can," he murmured to himself, still seated in the back of the taxi. The new curtains billowed softly in the afternoon breeze, reminding him of the ones Carmen had sewn so many years ago. The altar to Our Lady of Guadalupe had been rebuilt, but Matthew couldn't imagine himself lighting candles again without panic overtaking him. How could he live alone now after everything? Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every unexpected sound made him start. Gathering all his courage, Matthew finally stepped out of the taxi, his legs a bit unsteady. It was then that he noticed the luxury car parked across the street, the same one he had seen Victor driving on his rare visits. His heart raced, a mix of hope and apprehension gripping his chest. The driver's door opened slowly. Victor emerged from the vehicle without his usual expensive suit, dressed in the simple clothes he used to wear in his youth. His face, once always tense and burdened with the weight of business, now showed a mixture of pain and remorse. Father and son locked eyes, time seeming to freeze as years of distance and hurt dissolved into unshed tears. "Forgive me, Father," Victor began, his voice breaking with raw emotion. "I've spent sleepless nights thinking about how I could have been so blind, so absent. How could I have let that woman destroy the purest love I've ever received in life? Your love." Tears now flowed freely down his face as he approached, noticing every mark the medication and suffering had left on his father. "I know I'm afraid, not of failing as a businessman, but of failing again as a son. So of not deserving your forgiveness after allowing them to do so much harm to you." Matthew's eyes filled with tears as his son approached. How many nights at the clinic had he dreamed of this moment? How many desperate prayers had he made, doped and confused, asking only to see his son one more time? "My son," his voice choked with restrained sobs, his arms trembling as he tried to reach for Victor. "There is nothing to forgive. A father always forgives. Always." His words were punctuated by emotion. I just wanted to be able to hug you one more time before." Victor didn't let his father finish, enveloping him in a tight embrace like he hadn't done since childhood. "No, Father, say no more. You'll never be alone again. Never again. I promise by the memory of my mother, by everything you've ever sacrificed for me, this son will never abandon his father again." Victor finally reached his father, gently placing his hands on his shoulders. "No, father. It won't be okay because you won't be alone." His tear-filled eyes met his father's. "I sold the mansion. I sold everything that reminded me of that life of appearances and lies. I bought a house nearby, just 2 blocks away. I came to take you to live with me." Matthew felt his legs weaken, and Victor quickly supported him. The son who had always been so distant, so absorbed in his life of luxury and business, was now there, offering not only his presence, but a new chance for them to truly be a family. "But your company, your life in New York." Matthew tried to argue, still barely believing what he was hearing. The rebuilt house seemed to watch them silently as father and son remained on the sidewalk, each carrying the weight of their own guilt and fears. Matthew looked at the door of his house with visible apprehension. Every time he closed his eyes, memories of the days of terror in the mansion and the clinic assaulted him. The fear of being alone now fought with the fear of being a burden to his son. "The company can be run from anywhere," Victor continued, sensing his father's hesitation. "In fact, I've already sold a large part of the shares. I kept only enough to ensure our comfort, but without the madness that life had become." His eyes scanned the quiet street of Santa Fe, so different from the frantic bustle of New York. "I realized I was losing the things that really mattered, chasing after what had no value." Matthew tried to take a step towards the house, but his legs trembled violently. The memories came like an unrelenting avalanche, the bitter taste of the forced medication, Elizabeth's cruel laughter, the endless nights in the clinic, tired and confused, begging for his son. A deep sob escaped his chest as he staggered. Victor held him tightly, feeling his father's frail body tremble like a leaf in the wind. "Father, please forgive me," Victor pleaded, his voice choked with tears he could no longer contain. "Every night since I discovered the truth, I've had nightmares of you in that clinic, doped and alone, calling for me. How could I have allowed them to do this to the man who dedicated his entire life to raising me, who worked until his hands bled to give me an education?" He held his father's face between his hands, observing every wrinkle of suffering the last few months had left. "I'm so afraid, Father. Afraid of not knowing how to take care of you, of not being able to heal the wounds I've left in your soul. You were always so strong, so courageous, and I allowed them to destroy that strength. Son, my son." Matthew could barely speak, his trembling hands clutching Victor's shirt as if fearing he would disappear. "I can't be your burden. I've already destroyed so much. Your marriage, your life, your dreams. Because of me, you lost everything you built. How can I accept more sacrifices from you?" Thick tears streamed down his weathered face, each one carrying years of pain and loneliness. "I'm just a broken old man now. I can't even trust my own thoughts anymore." Victor held his father by the shoulders, his eyes sparking with emotion and determination. "No, Father, you didn't destroy anything. It was me who destroyed everything with my blindness, with my empty ambition. I let a viper into our lives and poisoned the purest love I've ever known, a father's love. You taught me everything about honor, work, dignity, and I allowed that woman to turn those values to ashes. It was my wrong choices, my absence, that nearly cost you your life." A gentle breeze swept through the garden, carrying the scent of the flowers Donna Rosa had planted. Matthew looked at his rebuilt house, each carefully restored detail, bringing back memories of a life that now seemed so distant. Fear gripped him again, making his entire body tremble. "How can I go in there alone, son? How can I sleep knowing the nightmares will come? That I'll wake up screaming, reliving every moment in that clinic?" His voice broke into sobs. "I'm even afraid of my own shadows now. What kind of father am I that I can't even live alone anymore without trembling in fear?" Each word was a stab in Victor's heart, and he hugged his father even tighter, his own tears dampening Matthew's white hair. "You're not alone, Dad. Never again. Even if I have to spend every night by your side, holding your hand until the nightmares pass. You carried me through life. Now it's my turn to carry you." "That's why you won't be alone, Dad," Victor insisted, his voice firm but gentle. "I've already furnished the new house, hired a trusted team, people who went through rigorous background checks. We'll have help, but it will just be the two of us. A real family." He paused, carefully choosing his words. "But I also understand if you need time, if you want to keep your independence." Matthew felt tears streaming down his wrinkled face. How could he explain the conflict in his heart? The desperate desire to accept his son's offer battled with the fear of once again becoming a burden, of causing more trouble in Victor's life. But your life, your friends, everything you built in New York. What friends, Dad? Victor interrupted with a sad smile. Those people were only interested in my money, my status. When the problems with the company started, when the truth about Elizabeth came out, they all disappeared. No one asked about you? No one cared about what had happened. He gently squeezed his father's shoulder. The only ones who showed true concern were your neighbors here in Santa Fe, especially Donna Rosa. A heavy silence laden with emotion fell between them. A few meters away, Donna Rosa watched discreetly from her window, silent tears streaming down her face as she witnessed that moment of reconciliation. Matthew looked at his house again, then at his son. But what if I have another panic attack, if I wake up confused thinking I'm still in that clinic? Victor moved even closer to his father, his eyes revealing an unwavering determination. If you have nightmares, I'll be there to wake you up. If you feel afraid, I'll be by your side. If the confusion comes back, I'll hold your hand until it passes. Dad, I won't fail you again, never again. His words carried the weight of a sacred promise, making Matthew's eyes fill with tears once more. Come see our new home, Victor said softly, guiding his father towards the car. I chose one with a big backyard, where we can plant those flowers you like so much. There's even a perfect spot to make an altar for Our Lady of Guadalupe. He carefully opened the passenger door. And best of all, from the porch you can see the sunset, just the way you've always loved to watch it. As they crossed the 2 blocks separating the houses, Matthew felt his heart calm for the first time in a long while. The familiar streets of Santa Fe seemed to welcome him, and the aroma of fresh bread from a nearby bakery brought sweet memories of simpler times. Son, he began, his voice choked with emotion. Are you sure you really want to do this? Leave everything behind for me. The car stopped in front of a cozy house, neither too big nor too small, perfect for a father and son to rebuild their bond. I'm not leaving anything behind, Dad, Victor replied, turning off the engine. I'm finally finding what truly matters. That life of appearances, the empty mansion, the fake marriage. None of that was real. Real is the love you've always had for me, even when I didn't deserve it. As they entered the new house, Matthew was moved by the details he found. Victor had made an effort to create an environment that blended modern comfort with elements reminiscent of his old home. In the living room, a chair identical to his favorite was waiting for him. In the kitchen, familiar dishes and utensils were organized exactly as he used to keep them. Look, Dad, Victor called, opening a door. This is your room. The room was spacious and welcoming, with a large window letting in natural light. On a nightstand next to the bed sat the portrait of Carmen, the only memento Matthew had managed to save from the fire. And my room is right next door. If you need anything during the night, just call me. Matthew slowly walked around the room, touching the furniture with trembling hands. In one corner, there was a small table already set up with new candles and an image of Our Lady of Guadalupe. But these candles were electric, a thoughtful detail from Victor, to prevent his father from reliving the trauma of the fire. Son, his voice failed him with emotion. I know it will take time, Victor said, embracing his father's shoulders. I know the scars won't disappear overnight, but we're together now, Dad. And I promise I'll never let anything or anyone hurt you again. He paused, swallowing the lump in his throat. You taught me that a father's love is unconditional. Now it's my turn to prove that a son's love can be too. Outside, the sun was starting to set, painting the Santa Fe sky with shades of orange and pink. Father and son watched the spectacle from the porch, their shadows merging into one. Matthew, finally feeling safe after so long, whispered, Thank you, son. Victor merely squeezed his hand in response. Words were no longer needed. The aroma of tamales reached them. Doña Rosa, of course, was already providing the welcome dinner. Soon the house would be filled with the warmth of homemade food and the sound of friendly voices. But for now, father and son remained silent on the porch, their hearts finally at peace. The past with its pains was being left behind, and a new chapter in their lives was just beginning, a chapter written with love, forgiveness, and the promise to never separate again. A year had passed since that Christmas that forever changed the life of the Vargas family. The house where father and son now lived together was magnificently decorated for the Christmas party. Matthew, sitting in his favorite armchair, watched with teary eyes as his son adjusted the last ornaments on the Christmas tree. Not a luxurious tree like those of the old mansion, but one lovingly chosen by both at the local Santa Fe market. "You know, son," began Matthew, his voice now firm and serene, very different from the fearful whispers of the previous year. "Each ornament on this tree reminds me of how God writes straight with crooked lines." He rose, approaching Victor, who was hanging a golden star at the top. "What seemed to be our destruction ended up being our salvation. We had to lose everything to find what really mattered." Victor came down the ladder and hugged his father, noticing how he had regained the sparkle in his eyes and the strength in his voice. The year had not been easy. There were nights of nightmares, moments of fear and anxiety, days when the memories of the past seemed to want to swallow them. But they faced everything together, each challenge further strengthening their bonds. "You taught me the true meaning of Christmas this year, Father," replied Victor. Observing the nativity scene they had set up together, each piece carefully chosen at the local craft fairs, "It's not about expensive gifts or lavish parties. It's about rebirth, about the miracle of love that overcomes all adversities." In the kitchen, the aroma of tamales prepared by Doña Rosa mingled with the hot chocolate that Matthew could now make again, his hands no longer trembling when lighting the stove. The table was set with an embroidered cloth made by Carmen years ago, which miraculously survived the fire, a constant reminder that some precious things withstand even the worst storms. "Do you remember what you told me when I was little?" Victor asked, helping his father sit back in his armchair. "That Christmas is when God reminds us that even in the most humble situations, the greatest light in the world can be born?" Matthew nodded, smiling as he recalled the stories he used to tell his son. "And you were right. It was when we were at our darkest moment that we found our light." On the wall, a new framed photo showed father and son smiling in front of the house. No longer the cold and imposing mansion, but a true home, warmed by love and mutual understanding. Beside it, Carmen's portrait seemed to smile at them, as if approving the new life they had built together. "Christmas is a time for forgiveness," Matthew continued, his voice choked with emotion. "But it is also a time for gratitude. I am grateful even for the difficult moments, son, because they brought you back to me. Not the busy businessman who hardly had time for a phone call, but my boy, the one who always knew what really mattered in life." Victor knelt beside his father's armchair, holding his hands that no longer trembled with fear, but occasionally with emotion. "The true Christmas miracle, Father, was you teaching me that it's never too late to start over. That a father's love is greater than any mistake, stronger than any storm." Outside, church bells began to ring, announcing the midnight mass. The streets of Santa Fe filled with the sound of children singing Christmas carols, their voices carrying the eternal message of hope and renewal. Father and son embraced once more, their hearts beating in unison. "Merry Christmas, my son," Matthew whispered, his words carrying all the love a father can feel. "Merry Christmas, my father," Victor replied, his voice choked with emotion. And in that moment, under the soft lights of the Christmas tree, they both understood that they had received the greatest gift they could wish for, the chance to be truly father and son again. In a completely different reality, the San Francisco Community Asylum, on the poorest outskirts of New York, was the last place Elizabeth had imagined ending up. Her fingers, once perfectly manicured, were now rough and stained with cleaning products. Her simple white uniform replaced designer dresses, and her hair, once always impeccable, was tied in a messy bun under a disposable cap. "Mrs. Elizabeth," the supervisor's cutting voice echoed down the hallway. "Emergency in Mr. Gomez's bathroom. It seems he had a particularly disastrous accident today. And from what I've been told, it wasn't just one accident. There were several in sequence, and he made sure to spread the result well." Elizabeth felt bile rise in her throat as the supervisor smiled maliciously. And he commented that he was feeling inspired by remembering how you treated poor Mr. Matthew. Curious how selective the elderly's memory can be, isn't it?" The supervisor approached, her nose wrinkling in disgust. "And this time I want everything impeccable. None of that superficial cleaning of a rich madame. You'll clean every inch of that bathroom with a toothbrush, and you can start by removing all that filth he made sure to rub on the walls. It seems Mr. Gomez was quite artistic today. She threw a pack of toothbrushes on the floor. And don't worry, we have plenty of those. Mr. Gomez has already warned that he intends to create a different work of art every day this week. After all, you have 5 years to practice your cleaning technique. The other elderly residents crowded at the end of the hallway, some taking photos with their cell phones. "Look at our little princess," yelled Donna Mercedes. "So chic with her new cheap disinfectant perfume. Hey, Paulinita, don't forget to clean well behind the toilet. Mr. Gomez took special care in that area, thinking of you." As part of her sentence for attempted homicide and fraud, Elizabeth had been sentenced to work at the community nursing home. The judge, upon discovering her history of cruelty towards the elderly, determined that this would be the most appropriate punishment to serve precisely those she so despised. Her assets had been seized, her accounts frozen, and she now depended on the meager caregiver's salary to survive. "How disgusting, how disgusting, how disgusting," she muttered, donning rubber gloves and grabbing cleaning supplies. An elderly woman passed her, purposefully bumping her walker into Elizabeth's ankles. "Oops, sorry, dear," said the lady with a malicious smile. "My hands shake so much. Must be the age." Elizabeth gritted her teeth, recognizing the deliberate provocation. The bathroom was a vision of nightmare. Mr. Gomez, a particularly astute elderly man, seemed to have taken special care that morning. "You know, Paulinita," he said from the doorway, watching her clean, "at my age the aim isn't always so good anymore. But I'm sure a refined young lady like you doesn't mind cleaning a little extra, does she?" His ironic smile made it clear that every stain on the floor had been intentional. During lunch, it was her job to feed the elderly residents who couldn't eat by themselves. Donna Mercedes, a 90-year-old lady, made a point of spitting out every spoonful Elizabeth offered. "I don't like the food when you serve it," she declared loudly. "It tastes like poison." The reference to the medications Elizabeth had forced on Matthew was no coincidence. Her story had spread quickly among the residents. "Please, Donna Mercedes," Elizabeth pleaded, trying to maintain her composure as she cleaned mashed potatoes off her uniform. "I need you to eat." The old lady just smiled, showing her dentures. "Oh, now you care whether an old person eats or not? What an interesting change." The other residents laughed, savoring every moment of the former socialite's discomfort. The supervisor appeared again, her eyebrows furrowed in disapproval. "Mrs. Elizabeth, after lunch I need you to clean all the rooms in the East Wing, and don't forget to change Mr. Ramirez's diapers. He's been especially productive today." Elizabeth felt tears of frustration forming in her eyes, but she didn't dare protest. This was her life now, a punishment that seemed to have been architected by karma itself. "You know what's most ironic?" commented Donna Lucia, an especially insightful elderly lady, as she watched Elizabeth struggle with a cart of soiled laundry. "You're exactly where you would have put all of us, serving, cleaning, suffering. But unlike you, we old folks have something you never had: dignity." The word struck Elizabeth like a slap, making her drop several soiled diapers on the floor. "Oops," Donna Lucia smiled. "You'd better clean that up quickly, dear." The smell won't get any more pleasant with time. The afternoon at the nursing home was just beginning, and Elizabeth discovered the elderly residents had prepared special surprises for her. In Donna Consuelo's room, all the clothes from the closet were strewn on the floor, intentionally mixed with the dirty ones. "Oh dear," said the old lady with false sweetness. "My hands were shaking and I dropped everything. You don't mind organizing it, do you? After all, you used to love it when others trembled because of you." As she bent down to pick up the clothes, feeling her back ache from the hard labor, Elizabeth heard laughter coming from the hallway. A group of elderly people had gathered at the door, watching her suffering with evident satisfaction. "Look at that," Mr. Vicente commented loudly. "How well the princess is doing as Cinderella. But be careful with the clothes, dear. We wouldn't want you to burn them like you did that poor man's house in Santa Fe." In the cafeteria, the situation worsened. Each elderly person seemed determined to make their meal as messy as possible. Donna Esperanza, usually an impeccable lady, deliberately dropped food on the floor. "Oh, excuse me," she said with a mischievous smile. "It must be hard for you to see food being wasted like that, isn't it?" Especially now that you can't dine at expensive restaurants with stolen money anymore. Paulinita, Don Felipe called from the other side of the room. I think I need help too. My hands are shaking so much. Almost as if someone had given me too much medication. The reference to what she did to Matthew was clear, and other elderly residents began to feign exaggerated tremors, spilling even more food. The night supervisor arrived for the shift change, bringing more good news. Mrs. Elizabeth will need you to work overtime today. 3 elderly residents simultaneously had intestinal issues. What a coincidence, right? And all the bathrooms in the West Corridor need urgent cleaning. Elizabeth felt tears of anger welling up in her eyes, but she knew she had no choice. As she pushed the cleaning cart down the hallway, she heard Donna Mercedes purposefully commenting loudly, "You know what's most beautiful? Seeing how God delivers justice. The one who thought herself so superior, who treated the elderly like garbage, now literally cleaning our garbage." The other residents applauded the comment, making Elizabeth shrink in humiliation. "Oh, I almost forgot," the supervisor added. "Tomorrow is General Bath Day, and you're scheduled to help all the residents. I suppose now you'll learn the true importance of caring for the elderly with dignity." Elizabeth felt her stomach churn. Her punishment seemed to get worse every day, and there was nothing she could do about it. The day was drawing to a close at the nursing home, but for Elizabeth, the horrors seemed endless. In the supervisor's office, she received the news that would complete her humiliation. "Starting tomorrow, you'll be transferred to the night shift, and there's more. We'll be receiving a new resident." The supervisor paused dramatically before continuing. "His name is Matthew Vargas. Ring a bell?" Elizabeth's blood ran cold. Matthew," she stammered, her hands starting to tremble. The supervisor smiled with cruel satisfaction. "Oh, don't worry, I'm just kidding. But seeing the look of panic on your face, now you know what it's like to feel fear, don't you? Like your former patients felt?" The other staff members laughed as Elizabeth felt her legs weaken. At that moment, Don Arturo appeared in the doorway, leaning on his cane. "Ah, Paulinita, good thing you're still here. You see, I had a little accident in the bathroom, but don't worry, I spread it out nicely, from the ceiling to the floor." His sarcastic smile made it clear that every stain had been meticulously planned. "And since you always said the elderly are a burden, I'm sure you won't mind cleaning it up, right?" As she dragged herself to yet another disgusting task, Elizabeth heard Donna Mercedes's voice echoing down the hallway. "You know what's most interesting? She has to work here for 5 years, according to the judge's sentence. That's over 1,800 days cleaning up our filth." The collective laughter of the elderly sounded like a final sentence. "And don't forget," Donna Lucia added, "she can't miss work or complain, or she'll go straight to jail." In the bathroom, as she cleaned up Don Arturo's deliberate mess, Elizabeth finally broke down in tears of frustration. Her reflection in the stained mirror showed an unrecognizable woman. No makeup, no jewelry, none of the arrogance that had once characterized her. The elderly resident's words echoed in her mind. 5 years, over 1,800 days. And this was only the beginning. "Oh, Mrs. Elizabeth," the supervisor called from the door, "I almost forgot to mention. Tomorrow we'll have a special visit. A group of journalists will come to do a story on the rehabilitation of criminals through community service. They're particularly interested in your case. The socialite who poisoned the elderly, now serving in a nursing home." The supervisor's smile was merciless. "Wear your best uniform, dear. It'll be a memorable day." Elizabeth slid down the bathroom wall onto the floor, no longer caring about the filth. Her dreams of luxury and power had turned into a never-ending nightmare of soiled diapers, filthy bathrooms, and vengeful elderly residents. And worst of all, every humiliation, every degrading task, every moment of suffering was exactly what she deserved. "Thinking about it," the supervisor continued, "I think I'll put you on the morning bath shift as well. All 45 residents need help bathing, and I'm sure someone as dedicated as you won't mind lending a hand." She paused before adding, "And don't forget, tomorrow is group bowel washing day. Get your gloves ready, dear." That night, alone in her tiny rented room, all she could afford on minimum wage, Elizabeth stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror. The woman who once paraded at gala events now reeked of cheap disinfectant. Her nails, once perfectly manicured, were short and stained, and tomorrow would be just another day of endless humiliations. Outside her window, She could see the lit-up skyscrapers of New York in the distance, where her life of luxury and cruelty had unfolded. Now in her small suburban room, she had only the certainty that each day for the next 5 years would be a new lesson in humility. Karma really is a... She began to mutter, but was interrupted by her cell phone alarm. Her graveyard shift would start in a few hours, and the elderly residents were surely already planning new surprises for their favorite caretaker. If you liked this story, we invite you to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to continue bringing exciting stories almost every day. Don't miss the next stunning narrative that is about to appear on your screen. We are immensely grateful to have you here with us. Now you can click on the links that are appearing on the screen right now. We have a special selection just for you, filled with valuable stories and guaranteed entertainment. See you there.